Everyone at the nursing home had seen Nurse Margaret's old locket. It looked simple, worn out, worthless. Nobody wondered why she never took it off, until 82-year-old retired General Patterson saw the symbol on the locket and said, "Ma'am, you were really there." Which city in the world are you watching this video from today? If you like this story about those who serve in silence, please subscribe and support us for more stories. The Sunset Manor nursing home stood as a peaceful refuge in the quiet suburbs of Virginia Beach, its Georgian-style brick facade and manicured gardens providing a serene environment for the elderly residents who had chosen to spend their final years in comfort and dignity. The facility prided itself on providing exceptional care through a staff of dedicated professionals who understood that each resident had lived a full life worthy of respect and compassion. Among the dozens of healthcare workers who provided round-the-clock care at Sunset Manor was Margaret Davies, a 55-year-old registered nurse who had been employed at the facility for the past 20 years. To her colleagues and the residents she cared for daily, Margaret appeared to be exactly what her professional credentials indicated, a compassionate healthcare provider who had dedicated her career to elder care after completing her nursing education. Margaret's approach to patient care was thorough and gentle in ways that distinguished her from many healthcare professionals. While other staff members might provide routine medical attention, Margaret demonstrated exceptional skill in trauma care, crisis management, and medical procedures that suggested training that went beyond standard nursing education. Her ability to remain calm during medical emergencies and her knowledge of advanced treatment protocols made her invaluable during critical situations. Every day without exception, Margaret wore a simple silver locket on a tarnished chain around her neck. The piece of jewelry appeared to be nothing more than a sentimental keepsake, perhaps containing a photograph of a loved one or a memento from her past. The locket was obviously old, showing signs of wear that suggested decades of constant use, and most people who noticed it assumed it held personal significance rather than professional meaning. To her fellow nurses and the nursing home administration, Margaret's locket was simply part of her personal appearance, no more significant than her preference for comfortable shoes or her habit of keeping her graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. None of her colleagues had ever asked about the locket's significance, and Margaret had never volunteered any information about why she never removed it, even during medical procedures where jewelry was typically discouraged. What none of Margaret's colleagues or the residents she cared for knew was that the locket she wore every day contained not a family photograph or romantic memento, but rather a classified military insignia that represented service in one of America's most elite and secretive special operations units. The symbol inside the locket was known to fewer than 100 people worldwide, and its presence indicated participation in military operations that had never been officially acknowledged. Margaret Davies was not just a skilled nurse with a background in healthcare. She was former Sergeant Major Margaret Davies, a 22-year veteran of the United States Army's most classified special operations programs, with service records that remained sealed at the highest levels of military intelligence and operational security classifications that would never be declassified during her lifetime. Her military background included selection and training for operations that officially did not exist, conducted in locations that were never acknowledged, against enemies whose identities remained classified decades after the missions were completed. Margaret's service had taken her to conflict zones and operational theaters where conventional military units could not operate, and where success depended on skills and capabilities that went far beyond standard military training. The decision to retire from special operations and transition to civilian healthcare had been Margaret's choice after completing missions that had tested the limits of human endurance and moral complexity. Her nursing education had provided a pathway to continue serving others while distancing herself from a military career that had required sacrifices and compromises that few people could understand or appreciate. For 20 years, Margaret had successfully maintained her civilian identity while serving elderly residents who had no knowledge of her previous life or the classified operations in which she had participated. Her commitment to providing compassionate care represented a form of personal redemption for military service that had sometimes required actions that conflicted with her fundamental values of preserving and protecting human life. The locket she wore served as both a reminder of her military service and a private memorial to classified operations and fallen comrades whose sacrifice could never be publicly acknowledged. The insignia inside represented not just her own service, but the collective dedication of special operations personnel whose contributions to national security remained forever hidden from public recognition. Margaret's daily routine at Sunset Manor involved caring for residents whose own military service had been conducted during earlier conflicts where operations were conducted with greater public acknowledgement and support. Many of her patients were veterans of World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, conflicts where military service was generally understood and appreciated by civilian populations who had some awareness of the challenges and sacrifices involved. The contrast between her residents' military experiences and her own classified service created a complex emotional dynamic for Margaret. She cared for veterans who could share stories of their wartime experiences with family members and fellow veterans, while her own service remained locked away in classified archives that would likely remain sealed long after her death. The situation that would ultimately reveal Margaret's true background began when General Patterson, a distinguished 82-year-old retired Army officer, was admitted to Sunset Manor following a stroke that required extensive rehabilitation and long-term care. General Patterson's military career had included service in multiple conflicts and leadership roles that had given him access to information about special operations and classified military programs. General Patterson's admission to Sunset Manor had been routine, with his family selecting the facility based on its reputation for providing quality care for elderly residents with complex medical needs. His military background was noted in his medical records, but like most residents, his service history was treated as biographical information rather than something that would influence his daily care routine. For the first week of his residence at Sunset Manor, General Patterson's interactions with Margaret were limited to routine nursing care and medical monitoring related to his stroke recovery. Margaret provided professional medical attention without any indication that she recognized his military rank or had knowledge of his service background, maintaining the same courteous but detached demeanor she displayed with all residents. The moment that would change everything occurred during Margaret's second week of providing care for General Patterson. She was checking his vital signs and adjusting his medication when he noticed her locket, which had shifted slightly as she leaned over to examine his chart. For most people, the brief glimpse of the jewelry would have meant nothing, but General Patterson's decades of military service had given him knowledge of symbols and insignia that were rarely seen outside classified military circles. What General Patterson saw inside Margaret's locket was not a family photograph or personal memento, but a small metal insignia bearing symbols that immediately identified it as belonging to a special operations unit that had conducted classified missions during conflicts where conventional military forces could not operate effectively. The specific combination of symbols indicated service in programs that were known only to senior military leadership and intelligence officials. General Patterson's recognition of the insignia was immediate and profound. His own military career had included oversight of special operations programs, and he understood the significance of the symbols he had glimpsed inside Margaret's locket. The presence of such an insignia indicated military service that went far beyond anything suggested by Margaret's current role as a nursing home employee. The revelation that the quiet nurse who had been caring for him possessed credentials from one of America's most elite military units left General Patterson momentarily speechless. His understanding of special operations and the individuals who served in such roles told him that Margaret's transition to civilian healthcare represented either a remarkable career change or a carefully maintained cover identity. General Patterson's military experience had taught him to recognize the behavioral patterns and capabilities that distinguished special operations personnel from conventional military service members and civilian populations. As he reflected on his interactions with Margaret, he began to notice subtle indicators that he had previously overlooked: her exceptional composure during medical emergencies, her advanced knowledge of trauma care, and her situational awareness that went beyond what nursing training would typically provide. The decision to acknowledge what he had discovered required careful consideration. General Patterson understood that individuals who had served in classified special operations often preferred to maintain their privacy about their military background, and that revealing knowledge of classified programs could have serious security implications even decades after the operations were conducted. However, General Patterson's respect for military service and his recognition of Margaret's probable sacrifices during her special operations career compelled him to acknowledge what he had seen. His approach was deliberately subtle, using language that would confirm his recognition without revealing specific details about classified programs or operations. During Margaret's next visit to check on his condition, General Patterson waited until they were alone in his room before speaking carefully and quietly. Looking directly at Margaret with the respectful attention that one military professional gives to another, he said simply, "Ma'am, you were really there." The effect of General Patterson's words on Margaret was immediate and profound. For 20 years, she had maintained complete separation between her military background and her civilian career, never discussing her service with anyone and carefully avoiding any acknowledgement of her special operations experience. General Patterson's recognition of her insignia represented the first time in 2 decades that anyone had identified her true military background. Margaret's initial reaction was to step back from General Patterson's bedside, her professional composure momentarily shaken by the unexpected recognition of her classified service. Her training in operational security had taught her to deny any knowledge of classified programs, but General Patterson's military bearing and obvious knowledge of special operations made such denial both pointless and disrespectful. After a moment of silence, Margaret nodded slightly, acknowledging General Patterson's recognition without providing any verbal confirmation that could compromise operational security or violate the oath of secrecy she had maintained for more than 2 decades. Her response was minimal but sufficient to confirm that General Patterson's assessment was correct. General Patterson's recognition of Margaret's service created an immediate bond of mutual respect and understanding that transformed their relationship from routine patient care to a connection between military professionals who shared knowledge of service that could never be publicly acknowledged. Their subsequent interactions were marked by subtle indicators of military courtesy and professional recognition that went unnoticed by other staff and residents. The revelation of Margaret's military background also provided General Patterson with new understanding of the exceptional quality of care she provided. Her advanced medical skills, crisis management capabilities, and psychological resilience all made sense in the context of special operations training that prepared personnel for the most demanding situations imaginable. For Margaret, General Patterson's recognition of her service represented both validation and concern. After 20 years of successful transition to civilian life, the acknowledgement of her military background raised questions about whether her carefully maintained privacy could continue and what implications might arise from someone possessing knowledge of her classified service. However, General Patterson's discretion and obvious respect for operational security provided reassurance that her acknowledgement would not result in unwanted attention or compromise of her civilian identity. His military professionalism and understanding of classified programs made him an ideal confidant for someone who had carried the burden of unacknowledged service for decades. The bond between Margaret and General Patterson that developed from their shared military understanding enhanced the quality of care she was able to provide while giving her the rare opportunity to interact with someone who understood the complexity of transitioning from classified military service to civilian life. Their relationship represented a form of mutual support that was rarely available to veterans of special operations programs. Margaret's story became an example of how military service, even the most classified and dangerous operations, often led to continued service in civilian roles where veterans applied their training and dedication to helping others. Her transition from special operations to elder care represented a form of healing and redemption that allowed her to use her capabilities for purely beneficial purposes. General Patterson's recognition of Margaret's service also highlighted the hidden presence of veterans throughout civilian society, individuals whose military contributions remained secret but whose commitment to service continued in their chosen civilian careers. His acknowledgement served as a reminder that heroism and sacrifice often went unrecognized but never unremembered by those who understood their significance. The locket that Margaret wore every day represented not just her own service, but the collective dedication of special operations personnel whose contributions to national security remained forever classified. Her decision to wear the insignia as a private memorial demonstrated that some forms of service were their own reward, requiring no public recognition or acknowledgement beyond the respect of fellow professionals who understood their meaning. Years later, after General Patterson had passed away and Margaret had retired from nursing, their brief acknowledgement of shared military understanding would remain as an example of how veterans of classified service found ways to honor their commitment while maintaining the secrecy that their operations required. The insignia in Margaret's locket continued to represent service that officially never happened, conducted by people who officially were never there, in defense of a nation that would never know their names. Margaret Davies had proven that the most significant military service was often conducted by those who served without recognition, maintaining their commitment to secrecy long after their active duty had ended, while finding new ways to serve others through careers that utilized their training and dedication in peaceful and beneficial ways. The old locket that seemed worthless to casual observers had actually contained one of America's most significant military honors, representing service in operations that had protected national security through means and methods that would forever remain classified but never forgotten by those who understood their importance and sacrifice.